Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Alexis Morgan. Thank you for having me.
And I really like what you were just saying, where you were like, I think I'm your biggest super fan as on the podcast, because this is your third time on my podcast. So I am dubbing Matt Todd, the ranch host, the super fan of the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast.
Can I get a shirt?
You're always asking for a shirt.
I love shirts. I think they're the best. And you still owe me a shirt from the PTA.
That's true. I know. You might not get that one, but I might be able to get you the super fan one.
I doubt I'll ever get any of them. It does not stop me from asking.
Yeah, that's true. You probably won't get any.
No. What are we talking about today?
So today we are talking about kind of like the takeaways from the season 1, because we've now hit July. This is the last episode of the season. Not that I'm like going to be tracking season to season, but everyone needs a good break for the summer.
Yes. Yeah, I was explaining to somebody actually recently that wants help doing a podcast. And I said, look, the thing that you're actually going to have to reconcile is the commitment of the podcast, because they want to know how much does it cost to produce and all. Yeah, fine. I'm happy to give you budget and everything, but the budget is irrelevant. It's having the constitution to continue moving forward with something that is difficult. It's like the hardest form of social media ever, because it requires actual forethought. It requires real production. And you just have to keep going, whether you have up episodes or down episodes. But I will tell you, your podcast is one that I found at the middle to end of last year, as we were coming into the election season for Board of Education members in West Ada. And yours was one of the first surprise podcasts that I heard. And I was like, this person is doing it right. And at the time, it was only audio, and you did have some small video clips, which were great. And you were doing the best with what you had. But I will tell you, I was like, this woman is really putting effort into trying to educate people. It wasn't painful. It wasn't like 1980s public access. That's why I reached out to you and was like, hey, let me, first off, come onto my show. And I was so excited when you accepted the little help that I was willing to offer you.
Yeah, it was really, that was my second episode, and I was really flattered. Genuinely, really flattered that you wanted me to come on your podcast, because you were covering you were covering the election for the school board members for West Ada. And one of the things that I love about that moment, and that I've talked to a lot of people about, is the idea of community innovators, people who are out there doing things to make it better in their community. And you definitely work you are a community innovator. And then we had someone else from the West Ada Parent Association, and then myself, and there were a few other people that wanted to make sure that we had good school board members for our school district. Right. That's a really important component of just a school community in general. It's who's on your school board. Yeah.
And to be quite frank with you, it wasn't until I started a podcast in the end of 2019 and then 2020 that I even understood that I came to find out at all what school board members were, that we had them, that the superintendent wasn't the ruling monarch over the school board. And it was because I started interviewing people that were running for school board. I'm like, wait, what do you even do? It's like, oh, you steer. You let somebody else actually pull the oar, drop the sail, get the cannons ready, but you're steering the district and they're just the execution arm. And because of that, I was so taken by this years ago that this is really important. People need to understand. And of course, these positions got thrown into sharp relief once COVID hit, because people realized oh, they're in charge of everything. They can shut the school, they can keep the school open, they can stand up for families, they can stand up for a union instead. They can do all, and that's not to say those are always at conflict, but we saw a lot of that. And it is something that the community needs to be deeply engaged with.
Yeah, I agree. When COVID hit and everything started to kind of get shut down, I had a friend reach out to me because they wanted to, we created this return to learn plan. Hey, we want to help our school board members and help our school district just in general. We're parents who care. We're showing up to do this thing. And one of the parents in this group said, after we saw how the school board members were not listening to parents, and they weren't listening to union members either. It was a really frustrating time. And one of the parents said, we did this to ourselves. because we stopped paying attention. And we now find ourselves in a position that we don't like. And so now it behooves us to do something. And so those parents, like they went out and did something. And a lot of people got engaged. And that's actually why we had Dave Benetti like on our school board, because he was a parent who got engaged during that time. And I just thought it was so cool to watch so many people get engaged during that time and say, hey, I find myself in a position that I'm actually like not really that happy with. I didn't even realize, whoa, like looking back, I can see how we got here, but you don't know what you don't know. And when they did realize and they did learn, then they took action and started to get engaged. And I love that moment in time for our school community.
I love it for our communities in general. I mean, because the bottom line is when things were fine, everything was fine. And yeah, like we have things we're always working on, and there's somebody always harping about, more funding for schools, and not to belittle that sentiment. Like there are issues with funding schools, especially in Idaho. But when things weren't fine, an elected official actually recently in Ada County, we were talking off air, and he said, look, are you going to sign up to solve the problem? And it cracked me up because his sentiment is, look, everybody wants progress, but nobody wants to put their hand in the fire. And especially with the problems that we're experiencing with our election system, not the voting system, but actually the elected officials and the structure of our election systems in Ada County and across Idaho. It's like, okay, but who's stepping up to volunteer to like put their hand in the fire, to take the heat from both sides, to always make mistakes, to always know that there are going to be people that hate you no matter what you do? Who's stepping up to do that? And I feel like there has been a shift in time when a lot of people are taking the position like, look, I've never done this before, but I'll sign up. Like, here I go. I'll give it a shot, right? Because I don't like what's going on. And so you have this level of civic participation that, at least in my lifetime, and perhaps I'm wrong, but it seems almost unprecedented. Like it's never come before where you had, an 8-way race for 3 Board of Education seats and people spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to move the needle and do what they felt was right. And whether or not you agree with them is irrelevant. But the point is, people are really trying, and that's great. And to the degree that we can, yeah, let's have robust discussions. Let's have arguments. Let's have it out and have meaningful dialogue. But at least we have people dialoguing now. One of the first guys I interviewed for Board of Education years back was this guy that everybody was mad at. They're like, the only reason he's still in the Board of Education is because he ran unopposed for 20 years. It's like, well, is that his fault? Or is it your fault? He ran unopposed. He was still running. He could have gone off and done whatever he wanted with his life, and he was picking up this pay-nothing volunteer job that nobody cared about. He got no credit for. Nobody even knew who he was. Only now that people want that position are they even being critical of him. And, of course, that is what it is. It's like, yeah, it's your fault. It's all of our faults if we only have one person running.
Totally. So that was the moment that you and I met.
Yes.
Was like at that time. And now I just looked it up, and I have 20 episodes. Now technically it's 21 because I had to break one up into 2 because of my podcast hosting platform. And anyways, I switched to something per your suggestion. And it just made me think like, wow, like 20 episodes, that's what a season like used to be like back in the day when we watched TV, 24-ish, give or take or whatever. But I've really felt very good about that, actually.
I think you should. Are you aware that we are in the series finale of the US?
What does that mean?
We're at the end. This is our last episode. With the presidential debate that just came by, we're at the end. We've had a good run. It's been like 250 or something years, right? And we're at the end. This is a season finale, and the writing is lit.
Wait, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the insanity that the U.S. in general is experiencing. You mentioned seasons. It's like, This is it. Mm-hmm. This is the end of the show. This is the last episode of Seinfeld. Like, they end up in jail. But I do appreciate the effort it takes. I've had multiple seasons of my shows. Yeah, man, it's a lot.
Yeah.
You've done 20, 21, whatever. Is this going to be 22?
So technically, like on the list, it'll be 22. Yeah, it'll be 22. And I just know that like a podcast is really hard to like get up and going. And I was on another podcast, and when I was on that podcast, it was like, I was joining something that was already in play. And so, yeah, there was like a learning curve for
Right.
being on air and for editing and doing all those things. But I didn't have to do the heavy lift to get it there. And when I realized that I wanted to do I wanted to do a podcast that was focused on school communities, particularly around the state of Idaho, I was like, yeah, this is great. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is a heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift because there's a lot of things to do along the way. And I mean, as you mentioned, like I was mostly doing audio. I did have video and I was just like happy to have video, and mostly because like the platform that I signed up for offered it. So I was like, sure, I'll stick it out there. But it was like you coming in and then sharing all these things with me about video. I was like, whoa, that's another heavy lift. Like even if someone's helping me with that lift, like it's like now I always got to get ready for these podcasts. Like before when I was recording, I sometimes could just like come from the gym and I was like, oh, now I'm going to be on camera. I'm going to do these things. Oh, wow. Now I got to like, is that really what I look like being recorded when I'm like just sitting there? Oh, is that my face? Like,
Oh my God, bless you. This is me at my absolute best, and it takes exactly 0 seconds. I marginally worry about brushing my teeth before I come here. No, I do, but it's not like
oh
it's
my
too much.
gosh.
The average podcast, I think, lasts something like 6 episodes.
Mhm.
And it's so incomprehensible for people until they've tried it. And it's so discouraging. The heavy lift predominantly comes from walking into a situation where you know you don't know what you should be doing, where you know you're going to make tons of mistakes, where you know you're going to have to keep improving. And what's worse, you're doing it for people because you really care, and they don't care. You have to like trick them into caring, which is the most infuriating. Like, I did the episodes on Board of Education not for my vote, for your vote, and like you don't even care. You know, and again, that wasn't my sentiment, but you can see people get really jaded and frustrated with it. And it's believing deeply in the value you're bringing and believing in adding value and having that be an end of itself. It's not fame and fortune. It's certainly not fortune. It's not even fame, but it's, I gave something positive to the community. That's what I saw you as doing. And that's why I was like, I want to help. I want to help however I can. Like, you're doing something real.
Yeah. It's just so appreciated.
You are so welcome.
Okay. So
I can never tell how sarcastic you're being. And by the way, I've been stuck on this comment I said like 10, 15 minutes ago about how you accepting the little help I was willing to offer. I feel really bad about that because I want to really temper. You do all of the work. I do add a little help, but I was willing to add everything I could help with. It's not like I was like, well, I could help you a lot, but I'm only going to help you a little. That's not the situation. I was like, I have a studio, I have cameras, I will help you edit, but it's such a small portion of what you've done.
Oh,
right. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, that's so kind of. Well, I tell everyone like you're my producer. Like it's just
brush that shoulder off.
Brush the shoulder.
Can I get some business cards at least?
I mean, I'm not going to be getting those for you, but you could make them for yourself for sure.
I'm holding out for the t-shirt. What's next?
Okay. So I went through and I was like, hey, at the end of every episode, I always talk about like the takeaways. Like, what are the takeaways from the episode? And so I was like, hey, like, what are my takeaways from season 1? Like things that I experienced or heard or captured from what I've been talking with people like around the state when it comes to our school communities. And the first thing that I thought about was the need for the conversations regarding our school communities. So not that long ago, I heard Jennifer Swindell. She is I don't know if it's like what we call like the executive director or chief officer. She was the person who created Idaho Ed News. And Idaho Ed News is like the education news source around the state of Idaho. And she mentioned that she used to work for the Idaho Statesman or something like that. And when she was working for the Statesman, the only type of education that was ever like education news that was shared if they had a special section on it in the newspaper. And I imagine that it was the same around for other newspapers like around the state. But basically she was saying that she was like, whoa, education, like for the state of Idaho, the budget for education is more than 50%. Like I think it's almost 60% of the general fund is used for education, give or take percentages, right? But her point was that like that's a lot. Not that she didn't think it was necessary, but that's a lot. And we don't have a news source that's solely focused on education. And she wanted one. And so she went out, I think it was like 8 years ago now, and started the nonprofit news source, Idaho Ed News, because she really felt like people around the state needed to have this information. And so that, like, her story came after I started this podcast, but it just made me think about my experience when I was thinking about like, hey, I totally want to do a podcast, and I really love school communities, and I'm realizing that there's no type of conversation about this happening around the state of Idaho. And kids are like the center of our universe, like here in the state of Idaho. I mean, like, we really care about kids in Idaho, and kids are in schools, and our schools are often like the center of our communities. And so this is why I think this conversation is so important. And it only has been, this idea has been reinforced as I've spoken with more people around the state about it.
Yeah. Listen, I couldn't agree more. And it's amazing when you conceptualize, okay, hang on a sec here. Over 50% of all of our money goes to this thing, but nobody pays attention to or talks about this thing, right? Like, theoretically then, so it would be the State Board of Education and then Debbie Critchfield. Theoretically, it's like these people are in charge of how over 50% of our money is spent. And when I was in education, before I moved to Idaho, I was in private education. I helped students with SAT and ACT work, college entrance essays. I love teaching. And I was talking to somebody years back. I now know this to be not true. I'm like, SAT prep and college entrance is bulletproof. Like, you will never find something that people care about more. And it's like a US institution, right? It's actually worldwide, which I didn't even know at the time because I only prep people locally. But like, the last dollar people will spend will be on their kids. And the last dollar that they'll spend on their kids will be their kids' education. So I'm like I'm at the crossroads of like, oh my gosh, this is the last big push, get them into college. And that's true. It's true, but nobody's even talking about that. Nobody's discussing the value of dollars for universities. Nobody's discussing the traumatic lifelong mistakes that people make with student debt. People are saying it's bad, right? You have the debt hawks that are always saying like, oh, this is terrible. Or you have people saying trillions of dollars of student debt. But nobody's talking about the mechanics. Nobody's coming out with like real stories. Like, we have stories. There's somebody that you and I both follow, Scrolling to Death, that frequently has stories about these horrible things that have happened to young people on social media. Yeah, that's true. And she covers these things. Why don't we have stories about like the 35-year-old who realized their student debt has actually gone up 500% since he or she graduated? Right? Like, why don't we have the stories of people that are trying to get a loan to buy a new washer and dryer and they can't get financing through like Sears because their credit's so bad from like, these are the stories that we need to focus on. And if we're talking collectively about forgiving trillions and millions and, well, let's not say trillions, but millions and millions of dollars of student loans, why aren't we collectively having a conversation about how that money's spent? It's like the same thing, but in a smaller version in Idaho, right? Unbelievable amounts of money. Nobody's paying attention.
Yeah. And it was interesting. Like, I don't want to say it and quote it because I can't remember the exact quote, but I was just listening. I was just like watching this thing from the federal government, like Congress was talking with a particular person about a plan for like next year for one of the presidential candidates. And they were talking about their thoughts on education and the Department of Education. And like the plan almost for like removal or getting rid of something. And it really freaked me out because I thought, whoa, I don't know that I ever thought that like people really wanted to remove education in like, and I don't know like what that meant for them exactly, but I just kind of think that like, whoa, this is a really important part of our like society, like what our government offers. And what is true is that the federal government gives the power to states to educate kids. Like, that power was given to like way back in the day when they started this stuff, right? And so maybe some of those thoughts are like, well, the federal government is not going to be in the business of mandating certain things to the states, right? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what the particulars about this plan, but what I do think is that it's really important for states, because we've been given that power from the federal government, it's important for us to take ownership of that. And I feel like the state of Idaho does. I feel like we do take that seriously. Sure, there's varying like opinions on all the different perspectives. But hey, we as parents too, like we need to show up to the conversation. And as a matter of fact, people want us at the conversation. Like as president of Idaho PTA, I got to meet with a lot of just different legislators this last year, and it was made abundantly clear to me that they were so glad that we were there. Like Idaho PTA hadn't, like the presidents hadn't been there for a while, and they were like, "We are so glad you're here. We need your voice here."
Listen, I I agree. I agree that it's really important that we talk to the legislators. I agree that we have a parent body that represents, like PTA, a lot of parents. I think it's really important that no matter what we have, or first and foremost, we have something that's educating parents. Because I think the issue with the federal education department is that it's so removed from like my kid's classroom, right? And it hasn't been articulated how or why it's so important that we have that department. I have heard that, obviously we know about the Common Core rollout, and there are some people that will defend that to death. I don't happen to think that was a great idea, specifically because it made helping kids too confusing for parents. Right? That was one of the greatest tragedies that I saw play out, which is, okay, wait, if you have 30 kids or 25 kids in a kindergarten class or a first grade class or second grade class, and I observed this because I was in private education, so people were reaching out to me for auxiliary help. Whereas you used to have 25 sets of parents, let's say in best case scenario, they're not divorced, they want to help kids with homework. They're like, okay, 25 sets of additional educators in the home that can help kids like with standard math, right? You removed all of them. And you didn't remove all of them because the individual states are like, I know, this is the best idea ever. We're gonna switch all this stuff up. There was a federal mandate that rolled down that changed fundamentally. There was that hilarious scene from The Incredibles movie, the second one, where it's like they changed new math, and Dad's trying to explain to what's his name, Dash, about like the new math and how they're changing it. You removed those educators from the child's education. And what a terrible thing. And there wasn't a conversation like at the local level, like, hey guys, do we want to change? Who wants to change math? Raise your hand. Nobody. So maybe that was a great thing. And I just haven't heard how or why. But at the very least, parents need to be educated and involved, right? Removing those parents did not help the students. Right. And not explaining to parents, even education-minded parents like myself, why this is important, why you need to go through this pain of relearning math and arc of the answer and this and that. Nobody explained it to me. Right. Parents need to be involved fundamentally. And there need to be groups that are committed, groups or individuals that are committed to doing the best they can to explain things to parents.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting because another component that came out in 2001, and this was really cool because I got to have a conversation with the past Idaho PTA president, who is now a legislator in the state of Idaho. And when she was the PTA president, this is when like No Child Left Behind rolled out. This was like the Bush era. And I remember this because I was like in my undergrad getting my teaching degree and learning about No Child Left Behind. But one of the things that No Child Left Behind did, which like we don't have that anymore, it got changed over to Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, ESSA. But what happened during that time was that they had like, this is when the federal government required state testing, and there had to be like all this reporting. Right. And so like, this is when state testing became mandated, and they were doing it all the time. And so this plays into like the second takeaway actually, which is like a big theme from this year is kids and tech. And I actually just had someone on social media say, hey, one of the things that I care about is how much technology is in the schools, particularly for our elementary kids, and how often they're on that computer. And so it was interesting because I engaged her in conversation and just basically said, like, one part of this is that we have the state mandated testing, and the most efficient way to do that is on a computer. And these schools want these kids to perform well because a lot of this money is off. I mean, a lot of the scores then are linked to money and different things like that. And so then you have teachers who, you have administrators who want to make sure that the kids are doing well. So teachers are spending a lot of time, making sure that kids know how to take a test on a computer. And so then all of these layers impact then how much a kid is on a computer in school. And that's unfortunate. Like that shouldn't be the reason that kids are on a computer, but parents care. And this is a conversation not only for that, but also social media, which is something that you've been really a part of. So tech and kids, that's a big conversation from this year. That's ongoing. Like that's a continued conversation.
It's going to be a continued conversation, I think, forever, because we're never getting rid of tech. And there was a period of time last year when I was really trying to figure out like, okay, what's the avenue where we eliminate tech in schools? And it's never going to happen. You're not going to, it's like COVID. We'll never eliminate COVID. Like it's here to stay. We're going to manage it. We're going to deal with it. Like fine, protect yourself, whatever you want to do. This is not a COVID conversation, but somebody told me early on, they're like, there's never going to be a point when this goes away. Like it's here like these other influenza viruses that we have and it's going to mutate. Fine. This tech problem is never, ever going away. But the conversation around tech and education, which has largely been ignored because one, it slipped in really quickly over COVID. They were just like, look, this is the solution. Kids can't come to school. We have to get them computers. And who's going to argue against that? It was like nobody had an option to be like, hang on, let's pump the brakes here for a second. Like, can we get back together in committee or something? They're like, no, like give the kids Chromebooks. We're about to lose like years of education with these kids. That brought with it a slew of problems that are now being teased out. And some of them are really bad. And I'm really encouraged about what our legislators are doing, not because our legislators are like, oh my gosh, I'm in the classrooms. I see our children. You know, when like some people just get patronized, like I see our children, like I've had, not in this state, but other states, I've dealt with some people who are like, our children are doing, it's like, stop it. Just God. But the point is our legislators are listening to the people coming to them, me in particular. Like I can call the legislators that are on the education committee. I can explain problems to them. They're putting me in contact with the right people. These are people who, once they understand the problem, they are willing to take meaningful steps. And that's great. Now, where the public education system lands eventually, who knows, right? It's probably going to be an ongoing battle between tech companies, schools, and parents. And parents, at the very least, need to know that they have to come to the table to argue for their kids, because what tech companies and what schools are going to be inclined to do to either provide services and gain taxpayer dollars, and what the schools will be enticed to do, which is most likely some form of cost-saving endeavors through, like, for instance, digital textbooks instead of paper textbooks, or upregulating the capacity to have 40 kids in a classroom instead of only 25, because 15 of those kids are going to be on tech and the other 25 are going to get direct education. There are going to be all these enticing things that will go into policy if parents don't show up and say, hang on 1 second, 1 minute here. You have my second grader. Is there a limit to how many hours my second grader can be asked to be on a computer per day? This is a 7-year-old. Just tell me if there's a limit. I'm not even saying this should be the limit. I'm just wondering, is anybody even wondering about this? And those types of conversations are starting to be had. And the key is going to be getting parents, not in a hysterical or crazy way, but like, hey, this is really important. Okay. If you care about education at all, and not everybody does, that's fine. And if you care about tech safety at all, or neurological development of your kids, and not everybody does, and that's fine. But if you do, these are the questions you should be asking.
Yeah. And I really like your point that it's about asking questions. Like, it's not like we're saying that something should be one way or the other, or that maybe we even have the answers to those questions, but it's about asking questions, because that opens up a conversation.
Right.
And we need to be having those conversations. And I mean, I had that conversation with my district superintendent. Like, I was just like, were you aware that in the 6th grade in this school, in this classroom, this is how much time they spend on a computer the entire period, every day? Were you aware of that? And as a parent, this is how I feel about it. And I would appreciate maybe you pursuing, figuring out, like, are there limits, right? Like, this is your job as the superintendent to be having these conversations with decision makers. It's my job as a parent to be asking questions and monitoring what's going on for my kid.
Right.
And so, yeah, so kids in tech, this is a big one. And I agree, it's not going away. And it's something that, like, I think it's so important for us to be vigilant about, especially when it comes to social media, cell phones, and the impact that it has on our teenagers with their mental health and with their social skills. Like, that's really important. And And one thing that like I've really picked up like from my own teenagers is how they don't like that everyone's on cell phones all the time. I think it's because like as a mom, I've constantly had these like I'm just continually having conversations with my kids, and they like once you see something, you can't unsee it. And so then like when these things are pointed out and then you start caring about it, it's like, yo, whoa, why are we on our cell phones all the time? Like, yeah, cell phones are like detracting from what's happening in the classroom. I'd actually like to have content that's like really engaging in the classroom. I don't want to be on my computer all the time. Like if I'm going to be at school for 7.5 hours a day, I'd like it to be enjoyable, productive, engaging, because I can be on my cell phone anywhere. Why do I want to sit in this really uncomfortable seat on my cell phone with content that's no good? No one really wants that. Like we want these experiences for our kids if they're going to go to these classrooms to be engaging. And the teachers that I talk with, they want to create engaging content. They are creating engaging content, right? So it's just like so much of this is about being aware, like you mentioned, and having these conversations with the people who are decision makers, who are being paid to determine what's actually going on.
I agree with you. I don't think there's a single teenager in the entire world that gets to the end of like a week long, no cell phone, you're out like hiking or you're doing this, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to have my cell phone back. Every single teenager always reports, this has actually been really nice, right as they just like pump that tech right back into their veins. Like you hand them the cell phone back and they cannot help themselves. That's really unfortunate. And once you, like you're saying, once you start seeing people go through this, once you start hearing young people, including elementary age kids, be like, that was really nice when there were no screens. And then we just hand the screens back. You can't unsee that. Like that was something for me as a parent and as an educator that really marked me, which is like, oh man, they don't even want it. They just can't help themselves. There was, oh man, wild. There was, I have to look, I can get you the exact name, but there was like one of the tribes, I believe in the Amazon, these anthropologists went and like found them and they gave them all cell phones. They gave them like with Starlink and stuff, internet access. And the tribe leaders freaked out because within 2 weeks, all of the dudes were like lazy, just watching porn all day and they didn't want to do anything. And then like the women were like starting to take selfies of themselves instantaneously. Like they couldn't help it. And that's, I think, a very, very base example of the urge that will constantly need to be fought, which is, hey, 14-year-old, I know you want to do this. Just like your lizard brain really wants you to do this, and I'm going to help you stop doing that. We can't take it so casually anymore.
Agreed.
100%.
Okay. So my next takeaway is this was a conversation I actually had with my oldest, Carter, where he was like talking about stereotypes in teenagers. And this kind of plays into what we were just talking about with technology. But teenagers, and I had my friend Amy on, who's a therapist, and we talked about teenagers as well. But like they really want to connect with people. And it's so important for adults. Like there's this stereotype sometimes that I hear from people where they're just like, oh yeah, teenagers are out there like doing their thing. They don't really want to interact with adults. They just want to be left alone. And yeah, they're grumpy and I'm just going to see their grumpiness and I'm like not even really going to engage with them. And I just think that's so unfortunate because teenagers are awesome. They're human beings. And just because they're going through this phase in their life doesn't mean they don't want us to engage with them. And it's so important, like, it was just kind of reminded in this conversation with my kid that it was like, hey, teenagers are really awesome people. It's important for us to engage with them. It's important. Like I can learn from teenagers. I do on a regular basis. And it's interesting because like my second oldest, Anya, she's about to be 18 and she's been like inviting me to do stuff with her this summer. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like loving this. And she said like, hey, I want to go to she's like, hey, do you want to work out? She like sent me this video from like Instagram and was like, hey, do you want to do this thing? And it's like running around the track and like planks and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'll totally do that. Did you want to do that tomorrow, like on Monday? And she was like, no. And I was like, well, I'm going to go to the gym. You want to come? She's like, sure. So I go, like, I told her when I was going to wake her up. So I go wake her up and she's like kind of like grumpy. And we all know this in the family. Like, yeah, she's kind of grumpy in the morning. Like I'm kind of grumpy sometimes in the morning, like kind of, like I'm not like super chipper. So anyways, she comes, we go to the gym and she's just kind of like, like that face. Right. And we get to the gym and we're like lifting weights together. And it was just like so darling because she was like, hey, I know I was like a little bit grumpy. Thanks just for sticking this out and having me go with you because this is fun and I wouldn't want to be here by myself. And I was like, that's the gift that adults can receive if we continue to stick it through with teenagers, even when they're just normal, like normal human beings and a little bit grumpy or a little bit weird or whatever. And that was just something that like has come out like like as a theme for me this year.
I really like that on a lot of levels. I think as we've become more independent as like a species and more self-sufficient, I mean, this is at the core of, like that Kikimora movement in Japan, where it's like the guys don't leave their rooms because they can watch porn and play video games all day. And it's at the core of, our family units completely imploding. And we didn't used to be able to get away with that. Like, we're designed to be cranky, annoying, and frustrating, and still a member of the tribe. And that's how we gain resolution with each other, right? As human beings, from like an anthropological standpoint, we have conflict, but we're confined. There's that hilarious from Modern Family when Gloria's like, how do you get the burro and the boy to behave with one another? You tie them together.
Yeah.
And she like makes Ed, what's his name? Ed O'Neill, I think.
Yeah.
Ed O'Neill and Manny, her son. She's like, they were in conflict and she made them do something. Like she stuck them together. It's like, I need you two to go to the store or something, right? Whatever it was. That's at the core of it. It's like, damn it. Right? Like, all right, I'll help you lift the thing up. Like, here we go. But it was an interdependence that led to resolution, interpersonal conflict resolution. And now we don't have to do that. Now we have these gigantic houses and it's like, I like a nice house, right? We have these gigantic houses. We have these infinitely distractible devices, right? It's like, I'll just, whatever, I don't care about you. And we just separate. And there's no resolution. There's no interdependence. There's no feeling needed and realizing that you need someone, right? Feeling needed. It's like, can you please help me? I know you're mad at me, but I can't do this by myself. And it's like, okay, here we go. It's not a story of conflict, but it's more of what you were talking about. My 10-year-old son, we went on a trip to California. He loved catching lizards in California because they're everywhere and they're lazy. I had no idea. California lizards are the laziest lizards ever. Like he just walk up and grab me. He's like, I got a lizard. I'm like, you didn't catch anything. You picked something up. There's a difference.
Oh, he caught that lizard,
okay.
Dad.
Yeah, that's fine. So we come back and he's like, I want to catch lizards. Well, lucky for me, from my podcast, I happen to meet an Idaho Fish and Game guy who's way into lizards and snakes and reptiles. So I get a hold of this guy, Charlie. I was like, Charlie, where are the lizards? He's like, all right, this is what you're going to do. Drive an hour south to Murphy, take Rabbit Creek Ranch Road, third cattle guard on the left, park on the left, trail on the right, have fun. And I was like, what? So, and now it's the desert, right? It's like, okay, we're going to the desert. So we got to get up really early. I sleep on my son's floor because he really wants me to have a sleepover. So I sleep on his floor and I wake him up at like 6 because I've been awake since 5, just lying on the couch cushions I'm sleeping on. So I wake him up at 6. I'm like, hey, bud, it's time to go. And he's like, go time. He's like, done. And he gets himself up, And we like slept in the car. He's like, are we eating breakfast? I was like, no, we're on an adventure. How long do adventures take? He's like, I don't know. I was like, exactly. We don't know. We don't know when we're going to get food. Here's a little water. Off we go. And we drive an hour. In the first 20 minutes, he's kind of like quiet and there's nobody on the road and the sun is coming up. And then he starts saying like little things here and making little comments there. And then we're on the adventure. And we get to the third cattle guard. We park on the left. We go running around the desert with a bucket and a shovel for like an hour and a half, chasing the biggest lizards I've ever seen. We found a ribbon snake hiding in a bush. He identified the ribbon snake. I'd never heard of a ribbon snake. He's like, I saw this on Coyote Peterson. It's a ribbon snake. And I looked it up and I was like, that's a ribbon snake. Thank God, not venomous or poisonous. Those are not the same thing. The point is, we run around the desert. We're covered in like desert dust, nasty. We find a scorpion, all of these things. And then we eat at the egg factory in Nampa on the way home. My point of the story is he was like, this has been the best day ever. It was only 10 o'clock. He was like, this has been the best day ever. Can we do this every single day? No tech, hours in the car, no idea where we're going or how long it's going to take. That was a connection. It's like, this is what we used to do before TV, before, cell phones. Like, this is it. And they just need that connection. And they will give you that gift of positive reinforcement. This is the best day ever, Dad. Talk about a gift to me. I was like, got it.
Got it. Oh my gosh, I love that story. Like on so many levels. That's just really darling. Like just so darling, Matthew.
So
like,
darling.
Best day ever, and it's only 10 o'clock.
It was why, and he couldn't stop telling everybody about it when we got home. And then everybody felt bad that they didn't want to come. It's like, you got to pay the price. Adventures are not free. Mm-hmm. And if you want an adventure with your kids, if you want awesomeness with your kids, what I've realized since we got rid of all tech in my house, it is not free. You can get free, but the cost is actually your children and your relationship with them. Just hand them a cell phone. That's free. Okay? If you want to put the effort in and you want to have the relationship and you want to have the whole like wake up at 6, the benefit is incredible. It's great.
Oh my gosh, that's like a mic drop moment right there, Matt. Bam.
One love.
Right there. I love that. So that then like leads me into my next takeaway, which is it's from this book and it's like, the book is called The Future You. And it's by a futurist, a guy who like, he doesn't predict the future, but he helps the reader determine like how to get to what they want.
Right.
And one of the things that he says is the future is now. Like right now is the future. If you go back a year, if you go back a month, like we're living in the future, right? Like I actually love this idea. And from my perspective, like it's so important to focus on the future, and the future is now. And one of the things that like when it comes to thinking about the future and also taking care of the future is making sure that we're paying attention to our kids. And because from my perspective, the kids are the future. Do I sound like I'm talking in circles? That's not what I intended to do at the moment. But the idea is that like...
I like that you weren't really concerned with my answer. Can I just point that out real fast? The future is now.
The future is now. And... There are studies that show that when we invest in kids in elementary school, it pays dividends in the future. Like we will spend less on that person in the future if we invest in them right now. And so it kind of like, I mean, just to your point about like spending time with your kids, right? Your darling adventure with your son and spending like paying attention to our kids and helping them with the different things that are going on in their life right now, that is paying attention to the future. That is investing in the future. And these conversations that I've had with people this past season, it's so evident to me that people want to invest in kids right now. They're not trying to put it off. They want to do it right now. And that's a really valuable thing. Because I think sometimes when we get into our worlds and maybe we just like get sucked into social media, or we're sucked in, or we're really paying attention to our job, or we're really interested in our, hobby or whatever, and I don't know. I just know that sometimes I have had the thought that like, is anyone paying attention? Is anyone like actually paying attention to the kids or asking the questions or spending time or doing those things? And every time I have a conversation, I'm reminded of the goodness that's out there in the world and that yes, people are paying attention. And I just am so grateful for those people. Like I'm grateful. My heart is like full for the people who are spending their time in their jobs, in their hobbies, in their families, in their communities, investing in the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people do want to invest. I think the world has become more convoluted. For instance, through my connections at Idaho, just talking about Fish and Game in general, a lot of old retired Fish and Game guys, I've started interviewing them and they're like hilarious. They're like in their late 70s and they're like old. They have all these glory day stories and like they're all broken down. Like one guy, poor guy, he used to be 6'2" and now he's 5'10", like, and his spine's all curvy. He showed up, he's like, look at this x-ray. And it's like with these rods going up and his neck is fused. So he has to like turn like this. And these guys are dying to take my kids fishing. And all like at the recommendation of one of them, I went to Julius Kleiner Park and they have these little ponds and I took my boys fishing and we caught a bluegill and it took like, an hour because I don't know much about fishing. But the point is we have these poles and we're doing it and I send them both photos. There are two guys in particular that are really intent on helping. They called me like instantly. They were calling and texting. One guy, I finally got on the phone with him and he's like, oh, that's so great. Next time you go, let me know all this. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Get off the phone. He texts me again later saying like, I love helping kids. People want to invest. I think for adults, if you're retired, it's like, look, you know how you want to take the little kid fishing and you like have a good time and hoop and holler. I think for adults, it's become more convoluted because what teens will report that what they want, which is to be left alone with their phones, is not actually what they want if you give them an experience because they will report, oh, it was better without my phone. So there's a disconnect there. And if parents and adults take teens at their word, which is like, well, they just want to be left alone with the phone. If I try to get them away from the phone, they don't want to do it. They just don't want to do it. I even offer to take her to the mall. She doesn't even want to go to the mall. Blech, like who wants to go to the mall? But the point is you have this disconnect where what they need and what they actually will thank you for doing is not what they're reporting they want. And that's really hard for people, at least the people I've spoken with, which is like no one has ever thanked somebody for giving them social media. No one. But if you take somebody to the desert to find scorpions, they will thank you, right? We have to lead our children, our teens in particular. We have to contribute by leading them into a better life and showing them the alternative and forcing them to make friends with people in the real world. And that's the contribution that I think people need to be gearing towards. And again, it's very hard. Like it's not clear how to contribute and how to help kids, but like we got to do it and we got to steer them away. I know I get very fixated on tech and like that's just very near and dear to me. And I see it affecting so many different areas of our lives, from the family unit to like contributing to the community to, like dwindling mental health, like all of these things. And it really does come down to access to tech.
Yeah. So something that you said, I mean, like, yeah, it does require effort, right? To do all these different things, to pay attention, to spend the time, to be aware. Right. And like, sometimes that is hard. And it reminds me, I grew up watching the movie A League of Their Own with like Tom Hanks and Gina Davis. I love that movie. Have you seen it?
Oh, there's no crying in baseball.
Yeah, there's no crying in baseball.
And Madonna. Let's not forget Madonna. When she was relevant. She was relevant.
It used to be a playground. Okay, that's the song. Do you remember the song?
I don't remember the song, but
I'm not going to sing it because I'm not. But like, this used to be a playground. They're just talking about the baseball field.
I do remember though not understanding what Madonna's character's past was, and then realizing later in life that she was a prostitute.
It wasn't, we weren't supposed to know. We were young. It was in the 90s. But one of the things.
If I may ask, do you remember why did Tom Hanks, the baseball coach, fall out of favor with like men's baseball? Was it because he was an alcoholic? Because he was initially drinking in the beginning, and then Gina Davis gave him her water or lemonade or something. He was like on the bus, he was like, and he handed her the hip flask and she was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I remember that great reconciliation between them because she was obviously very skilled and no nonsense. And you're like, catch the ball from Madonna with a bare hand kind of gal, and always at conflict with her younger sister. And the sacrifice that Gina Davis made towards reconciliation with her sister in the end of the movie, man, it was that like...
I mean, you've captured all of it. You captured all of it here, but there's a line. Gina Davis at one point decides that she's not going to play. Like, she's going to quit. Her husband's at home. It's just like not worth it. Like, he's returned from war. She's going to go. And so Tom Hanks is like, yo, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm leaving. And he's like, why? And she's like, it just got too hard. And he looked at her and he's like, it's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes it great. And that's the thing, like that's the effort, right? That's the hard that we all experience when we put forth that effort and the return that we get. And that's genuinely how I feel about, gosh, like this podcast, which has like totally helped me professionally. And it has been really hard, but it's like just so beautiful. I feel like you're getting emotional about something. Are you tearing up?
A little bit.
Yeah. What's going on for you, Matt?
I agree with you. It's the hard that makes it great. You have to pick the hard.
Yeah. And I kind of think that like you have been going through this, like with this tech stuff that you talk about, and like removing these different things because this is what's best for your family, and the beauty that comes from putting in all this hard effort. Like, it's the experiences, it's the connection, this is what we get when we put in the hard, like when we put in that effort.
I just feel like it's the greatest adventure of our lifetime, and so many people are missing it. And it's just, and it is supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes these podcasts worth it. Like, I've been slogging away on podcasts since the end of 2019. And it's the hard that makes it worth it. Like, I didn't know anything about audio video. I didn't know anything about talking to people or interviewing people. Like, it's the hard that makes it worth it. And it's the hard that stops everyone. That's the whole point. Find the thing that you can put your fist through. Find the brick wall that you think you could stomach going through. And like, that's the thing you go through. And it's just, it's so important. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And I remember that scene very clearly. And that's something from my childhood that kind of you sparked, that resonated through so many actions in my life. It's like, yeah, the reason we do it is because it's hard. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth anything.
Well, and that's what Tom Hanks says. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And I think there's something really true about.
Can I stop you?
Yes.
Okay. These are two different concepts, though. The idea that, yeah, it's easy. If it were easy, everyone would do it. Okay, fine. Whatever. But that's not the same as the value you should be looking for is because it's hard. Yeah, if it were easy, everybody would do it. That doesn't matter to me, though, right? What matters is if you want value in life, if you really want value, you better find the thing that you can barely hold on to, even conceptually, and then try to do it in the real world. That's the value. That's what you should care about. You know, it's not, yeah, if it were easy, everybody would do it. But like, God, man, like, think about what we're trying to do. You know, the projects I'm working on in tech, it's like, just wrap your head around the whole thing. Like, if it comes to pass that I actually do change state law in the state of Idaho, and then we can roll the similar template out to other states, like, that's the hard, right? And yeah, if it were easy, everybody would do it. But that doesn't mean anything, right? Conceptualizing this a year ago would have been like, there's no way. There's nothing there. But like, here we are.
Well, but it also shows that like, this is where like you're pursuing your interests and that you're willing to spend time on things that you like, where you're putting your effort, like what you care about. And what is true, I think, in that moment from that movie, and what is true like at this moment, is that if it were easy, everyone would do it. That's true.
That's true.
That's true. And that, gosh, there are some things that I watch other people do that are really hard. And I'm like, I don't even want to put my effort there. It's too hard. Right. And so I just think like, there's kind of two different things here. One, we determine as parents, like, hey, this is hard. It's not easy to, slosh through the parenting years. You hear everyone talk about like how hard it is in all the different phases. But at the end of the day, I would say a majority of people say, gosh, that was so worth it. I loved all of it. And I like, gosh, when my kid went off to school and I was like thinking about him, I was like, oh my gosh, if I could, I would go back and like hold him as an infant, because those were such beautiful years. But my gosh, Matt, they were hard because Clinton was in medical school. He wasn't like really ever around. I had 3 small kids at one point, and then I had a 4th, and those were really hard years. But I just think about like all the reward that's coming from that with the effort that's put in, to connecting with the kids and being aware. And now one of the things that's so beautiful, I heard a friend say this once about a hard experience that her mother went through. And she was like, her mother asked the question, like, gosh, I've wondered, why did I go through this hard thing? Like, this sucks. And the answer that this woman got was, well, you've been through this hard thing. Now you know what it's like for other people, and you can connect with them through this really hard thing. And so, I mean, I would say like, that's one of the reasons that I think that you were so great about helping me when I first started my podcast, because yeah, 1, you could see someone who cared about what she was doing, but 2, you understood how hard it is to start a podcast and to do the video and to, to slodge through and do all of those different kinds of things. And so then it's like, for me as a parent who I've been through, the entirety of a K-12 education system. I've got my kid off to college. I've been involved. I've asked really tough questions. I've had hard conversations. I've gotten answers I didn't wanted. I've put my foot in my mouth. I've done all these things, easy and hard. And now I have people asking me about my experiences. How did you do this? How do you have this conversation? My journey has the benefit, if people are curious about it, to help their lives if they're interested, right? And so that's the beauty, I think, of the whole process of going through these hard things, is that then we as adults get to connect with each other on the journey of the experience.
And that's the end, right? Like, that's the goal, to have done something that is hard, that you respect yourself for doing, that you've learned something from, and then you can share that with those that are coming. You have a contribution. You have a contribution. Imagine the hell of being like 50 and just being like, okay, so I have nothing to offer. I have no value to offer anyone. I don't have a skill set. I don't have like a life philosophy. I don't have like stories of child rearing. Like, you have nothing. You have not, like, that to me is horrific. And when I look at the things that have been most valuable to me as a parent and in my personal endeavors, it's like going straight to the hard in a meaningful way, in a way that teaches me something, in a way that I can knock my head against the wall and figure things out, gives me something to offer people. And I told you recently, like, one of my greatest flaws, I think, is that I'm too optimistic for people. I'm too overly encouraging at times, and I've done this with you. You're like, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh, it's great. It's great. Like, this is great. Because I do feel that it's so hard. Like, whatever we're doing, they're so hard. Like, we have not picked easy things to go after, and they're not short-term things, and they're not positive feedback things. Like, it's talking. When I started my first podcast, I told people, it was like, you just talk into the darkness. You have no idea who's on the other side. You have no idea if anybody cares, but you're doing this thing. So you've engaged in something that is super hard. And yeah, it's like, I saw him like, oh God, I got to help.
Yeah.
Like, thank God I have something to offer.
Yeah. I will say that that's something that I've experienced this year with starting a PhD program, which is like just been a wild experience in and of itself, is that every week after class at some point, whether it was like on the drive home or the next day or doing some schoolwork, I would find myself in tears those first probably 3 months. Like, what am I doing? This is so hard. Do I even is this the right space for me? What's this going to look like on the other side? And one of the things that I've really understood about this podcast is that this is where I invest in this because I care so much and I want to spend my efforts here. And this podcast has helped inform my PhD experience. And not only that, but in some measure, I feel like this podcast, it's it's hard to show up and it's easy to find guests. And it's gosh, I got to post, I got to this thing and stuff like that. This podcast has been such a joy for me this last year in connecting with people and hearing their stories and in being able to share and to hearing feedback from people. That's something that I've truly treasured from this last year is this has been a lift, and it was a lift last year. And I remember asking myself, if I don't do this podcast, if I just decide hey, this is too much, I want to invest in something else.
Right.
Am I going to regret that moment of choosing to do something else? And listen, choosing to do something else can be good too, right? There's no judgment there. But I thought to myself, no, I think in a year, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret not doing it. And so made the choice. And this last year with being the PhD and the podcast, it was all a lot. It was a lot, but it really, after I got through those first 3 months of the PhD and stopped crying every week. And I know, cause because I told you about some of the tears. I just was so glad that I could come here you know, X number of time and like talk about something that like I just really cared about and learn from people like who are in their perspective, like expertise and telling me about like what's going on around them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you didn't do this, it's going to be like stopping piano lessons when you're 10. And then you're 18 and there's some jerk who kept up with piano and he's wailing on it. And some girl's like, oh my God, that's great. And then we're pissed because we're like, why does he get to be good at piano? It's like, you had a shot. You gave up, remember? When you were 10, you'd fight your parents all the time. They didn't want to pay the $5 for you to go get piano lessons. That was on you. That was on you. Community members, it's on you.
It's on you.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my it's a takeaway, but more so like for the future. So as you know, this last like weekend, I attended a social media retreat and I like post my stuff to social media, you know, to Instagram and all the things. And while I was there learning from these two really awesome people, and then all of the people who were sitting there was learning from them too, one of the things that they said was, hey, don't blame the algorithm if your stuff doesn't go out. Like for Instagram.
I'm shadow banned. That's it. They don't like me talking about public school. I'm shadow banned.
Yeah, okay.
They hate homeschool people. I'm shadow banned.
Yeah, so don't blame the algorithm because it could just be your stuff. Could just be your stuff. But if you have really like quality content, what could also be true is that Instagram doesn't really know what to do with your account because maybe you've changed it over time, you've been inconsistent, all of those different things. And you know how like when you hear something, like just, I don't know, you're out and you hear and you're like, oh my gosh, like it just like strikes you at your core, like that's me, or gosh, I should do something about that, right? When she said that, I was like, that's me. I started this other Instagram account for something else years ago, and it was beneficial for me to use it like as I started the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast. But now I kind of feel like Instagram doesn't really know what to do with me because it started in one area and kind of moved to something else and then definitely moved to something else. And so for that reason, I made the determination that I needed to start a new Instagram account. And as you know, I went through a lot of different names trying to figure out like what to call it. And in the end, you were like, whatever, just name it something, Alexis. I'll just like whatever you choose. And I was like, okay. So I picked the Idaho Lady. Like I genuinely was like, I think I like wrote it down and I thought, I really like that actually. I'm from Idaho and I'm a lady. And so I can be the Idaho Lady. And that's what I am on Instagram. And I'm like really excited about it. And I'm excited. It's going to be hard. This is going to be another hard thing to like, it's hard when you start a new social media page. But I really think that that's the best thing for what I'm trying to do around the state of Idaho.
Listen, I love the name. I genuinely love it. And I gave you real honest feedback on your other names. This one is just, it's great. It just fits the bill. I follow the Idaho Lady. I think it's great. And it is, again, you know what I love about you having the guts to start another one? It's like you learned the lesson that it's like, it's going to be hard. It's meant to be hard. We're going to do it right though. Instead of like shirking the responsibility or like avoiding the hard and it never quite being right. And you wondering if like, well, is this why it's limited? It's like, no, I'm not afraid of the hard in this realm. Not that you've ever been afraid of the hard. Like you're a mom of 4 kids, you're still married. Like these are hard things. But this one in particular, it's so frustrating because you know, you're like, well, here goes 2 years. Like, and it's just something that takes headspace. So it's awesome. Like, yeah, I think it's going to be great.
Oh, thanks, Matt. I appreciate your encouragement. I hope it's not over positive encouragement, as you were saying earlier, that you give to people. I hope it's genuine.
I think I'm being pretty genuine.
No,
and I definitely like the name. The Idaho Lady just, see, you can't help it. You just start laughing. It's great.
I like
the Idaho Lady.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm amazed that nobody had it. Like when you sent me that, I was like, oh my God, like that's gangster. Like and I also love like the hyper localized focus. You know, let's stop. So many podcasts. And again, I've told you this before. So many podcasts are like, oh, I'm going to help people be successful. It's like, in every field, at every walk of life, everywhere in the world, if you're relevant to everyone, you're relevant to no one. That's something that I deeply believe. And taking community ownership, state ownership, localized ownership, it's like, I'm not going to be relevant to 20 million people. I'm going to be relevant to like 50,000, and I hope I get every 50,000, right? And bringing that out. And all of a sudden you're making things that people are sharing because you're relevant and important to them. Just doing the work for that. I love that. I love that you did that. Idaho's growing so much too. And unless we really work to educate people that are coming in like me from out of the state, unless we do that and in like good faith, not poo-pooing on them, but like, hey, listen, Sparky, look, just hang with me. And I know you've had a lot of bad experience. I'm sorry you had those. It's not like that here. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what is also true, like when we talk about education and when we talk about like, what's going on in the state of Idaho, there are some things that are just specific to Idaho. And then there are some things that are just general. And so like, that's something that I love is like, hey, I know my podcast is listened to people outside of the state of Idaho. Not every episode, because not every episode like resonates with them, right? But there are some things that are like universal, like that we have like this universal thread that goes through. And so that was kind of like what I was thinking about when I chose the name The Idaho Lady, because I thought, hey, my podcast is specific, but there's some universal threads, like themes. And so I just was like, you know what? Like, I'm from Idaho. I love being from, like, I love living here. My kids are sixth generation Idahoans. I actually just met like another woman who like she moved here from another state and she kept telling me she was like from another state, and then I realized that like she has family like generations, we're talking like plural, back in Idaho. And I was like, hey, that's cool that like you lived in another state. Also cool that like you're connected to Idaho in this way that I didn't realize. Like she's got, and this is what I love about the state of Idaho is that you can go around the state and we just like have this like cozy experience where it's like, no, it doesn't matter like how long you've lived here. I know, Matt, we've had this conversation before. It doesn't matter how long you've lived here. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter how long you've lived here if you're willing to invest, I think, in the community. Now, you don't have to invest in the community, but one thing that like I've seen is that like as I've like gone around the state and I've met people, regardless of how long they've been residents of Idaho, I love connecting with the people who care about their community, who are here because they want to make a difference. I mean, for example, like Norm Stewart, who's the superintendent out in like Marsing School District. This guy was not born and raised in Idaho, but he's from a small town in Oregon. He gets like that rural small town life. And here he is in Idaho. He's been here for over a decade, making a difference in our state because he loves Idaho. He's an Idahoan, right? And he cares about what's happening in his community out there. And like, you and I have had this conversation, like, well, what does it mean to be an Idahoan? And when I first got to the state, like, I didn't feel like an Idahoan. I was like, oh, I moved here and my husband's from here and this is great. I love it. And within months of being in the state, I realized like, hey, there's so many different ways that I can get involved in my community. And then I was on the like school board, and then I was the PTA president, and then I was doing state stuff. And I just thought like, man, I'm an Idahoan and I love it here.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really like it here too. I'm trying to help. I don't know if I'm helping, but I'm trying to help too.
You are.
When you talk about people like moving and helping, it's like, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not saying this conversation's not about beat, but I feel that. Mm-hmm. And I hope I'm contributing something.
Oh my gosh, you are. You totally are, Matt. You're rocking it.
To be determined.
You're so funny. Well, thanks so much.
Wait, don't I get a takeaway as your producer?
Yes, please. Yes. What is the takeaway from this season?
I feel like you were the right person to help.
Matt, that's really kind of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Did you want to say anything else?
That's it.
That's it. Oh, thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
That's really kind of you to say. Okay, well, thank you to everyone who's listening and to being a part of the first season of Our Kids, Our Schools. Yes.
In the bag.
In the bag. And I will see you I will see you as school starts this upcoming next season. It'll be great.
Great.